For decades, the quiet lands once cherished by Queen Elizabeth II were considered more than just royal property. Hidden behind ancient gates and miles of rolling countryside, the Queen's private estate represented something deeper, a place of reflection, family legacy, and personal history that few people truly understood. It was not merely land. It was a symbol of continuity within the British monarchy. But everything changed the moment a decision emerged from the inner circle of the crown. A decision that would ignite whispers across royal halls, spark tension within the royal family, and leave one particular household absolutely stunned. Because when the ownership of the Queen's beloved private estate was finally revealed, the new holder of that legacy was none other than Prince William. To many royal observers, the move seemed natural. William was the future of the monarchy, steady, composed, and deeply trusted by his grandmother. Yet behind palace doors, the announcement did not land quietly. In fact, within another branch of the royal family, the reaction was immediate and furious. The family of Camilla, now queen consort beside King Charles III, reportedly saw the decision very differently. To them, this wasn't simply about land. It was about power, legacy, and who truly carried the Queen's final trust. And as the truth of the estate transfer slowly unfolded, the royal family found itself facing one of the most uncomfortable questions in modern monarchy. Why did the Queen choose William? And what did she know that others didn't? For most people, the British monarchy is defined by grand palaces, ceremonial halls, and historic castles that stretch across centuries of tradition. But behind the official residences and the carefully planned public appearances, there have always been places that meant far more to the royal family than any crown jewel or state chamber ever could. Among those deeply personal places was one particular private estate that held a special place in the life of Queen Elizabeth II. To the outside world, it appeared to be simply another royal property. A quiet expanse of countryside surrounded by forests, open fields, and carefully maintained gardens. But to the Queen, it represented something entirely different. A sanctuary away from the endless responsibilities of the crown. It was a place where she could step away from the formal expectations of monarchy and reconnect with something far more human. The feeling of home. Throughout her reign, which lasted more than 70 years, the Queen ruled an institution that rarely allowed room for personal emotion. Every speech was measured, every appearance carefully observed, every decision weighed against the expectations of tradition and duty. Yet in this private estate, the world slowed down. Here, she could walk through long tree-lined paths without cameras following her every move. She could spend quiet mornings watching the countryside awaken under the soft light of dawn. And perhaps most importantly, she could spend time with family, not as a monarch, but as a grandmother. Among all the grandchildren who visited those peaceful grounds, one in particular seemed to share the deepest connection with her. That grandson was Prince William. From a young age, William often found himself drawn into conversations with the Queen that went far beyond ordinary family talk. While many members of the royal household focused on ceremonial responsibilities and public engagements, William seemed to carry a natural curiosity about the deeper responsibilities of monarchy. He listened carefully when the Queen spoke about history. He asked questions about leadership. And most importantly, he paid attention when she discussed the importance of preserving the dignity and stability of the crown. Those quiet conversations, often held during long countryside walks, would later become far more important than anyone at the time could have imagined. Because during those moments, the Queen wasn't simply speaking to a grandson. She was speaking to someone she believed would one day carry the same immense responsibilities she had carried for most of her life. As William grew older, that bond only strengthened. Unlike the public image often presented in the media, one of distant royal formality, their relationship was built on something far more personal. The Queen appreciated William's calm demeanor, his thoughtful approach to difficult questions, and his clear understanding that royal privilege always came with royal duty. There were moments when palace staff quietly noticed how the Queen's expression softened whenever William arrived for a visit. And within those quiet moments, the estate itself became a silent witness to the relationship that was quietly shaping the future of the monarchy. But not everyone within the royal circle viewed these interactions in the same way. As the years passed and the royal family continued to evolve, new dynamics began to form inside the palace walls. One of the most significant changes came when Camilla formally took her place beside King Charles III, bringing with her a different family history and a different set of loyalties. While the public saw the union as a continuation of Charles's long-standing relationship, behind closed doors, the integration of Camilla's extended family into the wider royal environment created quiet tensions that few outside observers truly understood. Camilla's relatives were not part of the monarchy's long-standing structure. They came from a different world, one far removed from centuries-old royal traditions. And as time passed, some of those relatives reportedly began to view the expanding royal circle as an opportunity to secure their own position within it. The private estate that had once served as the Queen's peaceful refuge gradually became something else in the minds of certain observers. It became a symbol of inheritance, a symbol of influence, and perhaps most importantly, a symbol of who would ultimately control one of the most treasured personal properties within the royal legacy. Inside the palace, discussions about the long-term future of royal estates were not unusual. In fact, they were an essential part of maintaining the stability of the monarchy. Properties that had once belonged to previous monarchs often carried complex legal and ceremonial implications. Some belonged to the crown estate. Others were held personally by members of the royal family, and a select few remained deeply private possessions that monarchs could pass down according to their own wishes. The Queen's countryside estate fell into that final category, which meant that one day, its future would depend entirely on a decision made by the Queen herself. For many years, that decision remained a mystery. Royal staff rarely spoke about it. Legal documents were quietly maintained within trusted offices. And even among senior members of the royal household, speculation was carefully avoided. But as the Queen grew older, the question slowly became unavoidable. Who would inherit the estate that had meant so much to her? Some believed the natural choice would be her eldest son, Charles. Others assumed the property would remain within a broader royal trust connected to the monarchy. Yet those closest to the Queen understood something that outsiders often missed. This estate had never been about tradition alone. It had always been about trust. And when the Queen thought about the future of that peaceful land, the place where she had spent countless private moments away from royal ceremony, she did not think first about titles or hierarchy. She thought about character. She thought about responsibility. She thought about the person who understood what the estate truly represented. And again, her thoughts returned to the same individual who had once walked those quiet paths beside her as a curious young prince, Prince William. At the time, very few people realized how deeply those reflections would shape one of the Queen's final private decisions. Because while public attention remained focused on state events and royal appearances, something far more significant was slowly unfolding within the legal structures that governed the Queen's personal property. Lawyers, advisors, and trusted aides began quietly reviewing documents that had not been updated in years. Conversations took place behind closed doors. Details were carefully examined. And within those discussions, a decision began to take form, one that would eventually send shockwaves through parts of the extended royal family. But none of those reactions had happened yet. For the moment, the countryside estate remained exactly as it had always been, peaceful, silent, unaware that its future would soon become the center of one of the most talked about royal inheritance decisions in modern history. And when that decision finally became known, it would reveal not only the Queen's personal trust, but also the delicate balance of power quietly shaping the future of the monarchy under King Charles III. What no one realized at the time was that this choice would also ignite a wave of frustration within the circle surrounding Camilla, a reaction that would leave royal observers wondering just how deep the internal divisions within the royal family had truly become. Because once the Queen's decision was revealed, one thing would become absolutely clear. This was never just about land. It was about legacy. And the next chapter of that legacy was about to begin. As the years moved forward and the reign of Queen Elizabeth II entered its later chapters, many within the royal household began to notice a subtle shift in the way the monarch approached certain personal matters. Publicly, nothing seemed different. The Queen continued to carry out her duties with the same calm dignity that had defined her reign for decades. State ceremonies continued. Official audiences were held. Royal traditions moved forward with the precision and discipline that had long made the British monarchy one of the most stable institutions in the world. But privately, behind the quiet corridors of royal residences, the Queen had begun thinking more deeply about the future. Not just the future of the crown, but the future of the personal legacies she would one day leave behind. Among those legacies, one matter held particular importance in her mind: the fate of the beloved countryside estate that had brought her so many moments of peace. For years, the estate had remained a place of quiet reflection. It was where she could escape the weight of royal expectations and simply enjoy the rhythm of nature. Many of the Queen's closest aides understood that this land meant far more to her than its financial value. It was a part of her story, a place filled with memories that stretched across decades. And because of that, the Queen felt a growing sense that the estate should be entrusted to someone who truly understood its meaning. This was not a decision that could be made lightly. Royal property transfers, especially those involving personal estates, required careful legal preparation and complete discretion. Documents needed to be reviewed. Advisors needed to confirm every detail. And above all, the process had to remain quiet until the moment was right. So the Queen began consulting a small circle of trusted individuals. These were people who had served the crown for many years: legal experts, longtime advisors, and royal aides who understood both the tradition and the sensitivities surrounding the monarch's private possessions. During those discussions, several possibilities were examined. One option was to keep the estate within a broader royal trust, ensuring that future monarchs could maintain it as a shared family retreat. Another possibility involved passing the property directly to her eldest son, King Charles III, who had spent his life preparing to lead the monarchy. At first glance, that option appeared to be the most traditional, but the Queen's thoughts kept returning to a different name: Prince William. By this stage in his life, William had already begun taking on a far more visible role within the royal family. His sense of duty was clear, and many royal observers believed he represented the future direction of the monarchy. Yet, what mattered most to the Queen was not public perception. It was the quiet understanding she believed William possessed. Over the years, she had seen how he approached responsibility. She had listened to his thoughts about the role of the monarchy in modern society, and she had watched as he balanced royal tradition with a deep awareness of how the institution needed to evolve. Those qualities mattered, because the estate she was considering passing down was not just another property. It was a symbol of continuity, a place where future generations of the royal family could reconnect with the quieter values that had guided the monarchy for centuries. One evening, after another long day of official duties, the Queen reportedly sat down with a small group of legal advisors to review the final possibilities. The atmosphere during that meeting was calm, but the significance of the moment was clear to everyone present. Decisions like this did not happen often. When a monarch chose to pass down a personal estate, the choice carried meaning far beyond legal ownership. It sent a message about trust, about legacy, and about who the monarch believed was ready to carry forward something deeply personal. After reviewing the documents and discussing the long-term implications, the Queen made her decision. The estate would be transferred to Prince William. For a brief moment, the room reportedly fell silent. The advisors present understood exactly what this meant. It was not simply a gift of land. It was a sign of the Queen's personal confidence in William's role in the future of the royal family. And with that decision, preparations quietly began. Legal documents were drafted and reviewed. Ownership structures were carefully adjusted to ensure everything followed royal property regulations. And perhaps most importantly, the process remained strictly confidential. Even within the royal family, very few people were immediately informed. The Queen believed that such matters should remain private until the appropriate moment. But as history has often shown, secrets within royal circles rarely remain hidden forever. While the legal process moved forward quietly, subtle rumors began circulating among palace staff and royal observers. Whispers about estate arrangements, speculation about future inheritance plans. Nothing specific, but enough to spark curiosity within certain corners of the extended royal network. Among those who eventually heard these whispers were individuals connected to the wider family circle surrounding Camilla. By this time, Camilla had fully settled into her position alongside King Charles III. Her role within the monarchy had grown stronger, and her family naturally found themselves closer to royal life than ever before. Some members of her extended circle began to wonder whether royal estates might one day become part of their own future connections to the monarchy. While such thoughts were rarely spoken openly, they existed quietly in the background, and that made the Queen's decision all the more surprising. Because when the truth about the estate transfer finally began reaching the ears of those outside the Queen's trusted advisors, it was clear that the chosen recipient had not changed. It was still Prince William. For some observers, this outcome made perfect sense. William represented the direct future of the monarchy. As the next generation after Charles, he carried enormous responsibility for maintaining the institution's stability. But for others, especially those who had begun imagining different possibilities, the news came as a shock. Questions started appearing almost immediately. Why William? Why not leave the estate directly within the authority of King Charles III? Why make such a personal transfer instead of allowing the property to remain within the wider royal structure? Inside palace corridors, the answers remained the same. The Queen had made a private decision, and once she made a decision, it was rarely reconsidered. Still, as the news slowly traveled through the extended royal circles, one thing became increasingly clear. Not everyone was pleased. Within the broader social network surrounding Camilla, frustration quietly began to grow. For them, the estate had represented a possible shift in royal influence, an opportunity for the new royal generation connected to Charles and Camilla to play a greater role in shaping the monarchy's personal legacy. Instead, the Queen had reinforced something different. She had strengthened the path leading directly toward William. And while the public had not yet learned about the decision, the first signs of tension had already begun forming behind the palace walls. Because in royal families, inheritance is rarely just about property. It is about recognition. It is about status. And sometimes, it is about who stands closest to the trust of the monarch herself. As the quiet legal process continued moving forward, the Queen remained calm about the path she had chosen. To her, the estate was now in the right hands. But elsewhere in the royal world, the reaction was slowly building. And once the decision became widely known, that reaction would grow far louder than anyone inside the palace had anticipated. Because the moment the public discovered that the Queen's cherished estate had been entrusted to Prince William, a wave of anger would erupt from one particular corner of the royal family. A reaction that would soon place the spotlight squarely on the uneasy relationship between William's future and the expectations surrounding Camilla and her family. And that reaction was about to turn a quiet inheritance decision into a royal controversy that no one could ignore. For a long time, the decision made by Queen Elizabeth II remained one of the most carefully guarded private matters within the royal household. The documents had been prepared quietly. Legal formalities had been completed with extreme discretion. Only a handful of trusted advisors knew the full details. But within royal circles, secrets rarely stay hidden forever. The monarchy may appear calm and controlled from the outside, yet behind the walls of palaces and private estates, information has a way of slowly spreading through whispers, conversations, and careful observations. And eventually, the story began to emerge. At first, it appeared only as quiet speculation among royal watchers and palace insiders. Small hints started circulating that one of the Queen's most cherished private estates had already been assigned to a future owner. Those whispers alone were enough to spark curiosity. After all, properties connected to the monarch often carried enormous historical and financial value. Any decision about their future would naturally attract attention, especially if the transfer had taken place privately. But the moment the identity of the new owner became known, the whispers turned into something far bigger. Because the estate had not been transferred to King Charles III. It had not been placed inside a royal trust. Instead, the land had been entrusted directly to the Queen's grandson, Prince William. For many royal observers, the decision seemed both meaningful and symbolic. William had long been viewed as a steady figure of the monarchy's next generation. His calm leadership style, his careful approach to public responsibility, and his strong connection to royal tradition had earned him respect both within Britain and internationally. To them, the Queen's choice appeared logical. She had selected someone who represented the long-term stability of the crown. But in other parts of the extended royal circle, the reaction was very different. Within the social and family networks connected to Camilla, the news was received with shock, and in some cases, visible anger. For some members of that circle, the estate had quietly represented something more than land. It symbolized the evolving structure of the monarchy under King Charles III. When Charles became king, many expected that the broader influence of his household would naturally expand. Camilla had already spent years rebuilding her public image and strengthening her position beside Charles. Over time, her family had also grown more familiar with the environment of royal life. Some had begun imagining a future in which their presence within royal circles would become increasingly normal. But the Queen's decision seemed to send a very different message. By passing the estate directly to William, she had effectively reinforced the line of succession in a deeply personal way. The property had skipped over Charles entirely and moved straight to the next generation. To some observers, that choice spoke volumes. It suggested that the Queen's long-term vision for the monarchy placed enormous trust in William's leadership. And while that might have been reassuring to many royal supporters, it created an uncomfortable feeling within parts of Camilla's extended family. Conversations reportedly began taking place behind closed doors. Questions were raised. Why had the estate been given to William instead of remaining under Charles's authority? Why had such an important decision been made without broader family discussion? And perhaps most importantly, what did the choice reveal about the Queen's personal priorities? Although few people spoke publicly about these concerns, the tension began quietly spreading through royal social circles. Those close to the palace noticed a subtle shift in tone. Private gatherings that once felt relaxed became more cautious. Certain conversations were avoided altogether because everyone understood that the Queen's decision was final, and challenging that decision openly would have been unthinkable. Meanwhile, Prince William himself reportedly approached the situation with remarkable restraint. Those who knew him well understood that he had never sought personal advantage within the royal family. His public life had always revolved around service, responsibility, and preparation for the future role he would one day inherit. The estate transfer did not change that approach. If anything, it reinforced a wave of expectation already resting on his shoulders. Owning a property so closely associated with the Queen carried emotional meaning far beyond its physical boundaries. It represented trust, a deeply personal form of trust from a monarch who had ruled Britain longer than anyone in modern history. William reportedly understood that clearly. Rather than celebrating the inheritance publicly, he maintained the same quiet dignity that had defined his role for years. No grand announcements, no public displays of triumph, just quiet acceptance of a responsibility that now belonged to him. Yet outside the palace, speculation continued growing. Royal commentators began discussing the implications of the Queen's choice. Some described it as a powerful endorsement of William's future leadership. Others wondered whether the decision reflected deeper internal dynamics within the royal family. After all, royal inheritances have always carried layers of meaning beyond simple property ownership. They often reveal the personal relationships and trust that exist within the family itself. And in this case, the message seemed clear. The Queen had chosen William, not simply as a future king, but as a guardian of something that had meant a great deal to her personally. For many supporters of the monarchy, that message felt reassuring. It suggested that the Queen had carefully considered the future before making her decision. Yet in the background, frustration within Camilla's extended circle had not disappeared. If anything, the growing public attention surrounding the estate transfer only made the situation more uncomfortable. Because now the story was no longer private. The public knew, and every new discussion about the estate seemed to highlight the same reality. The Queen's personal trust had been placed in Prince William. For those who had imagined a different outcome, that reality was difficult to ignore. Inside the palace, senior advisors remained determined to prevent the issue from escalating into a larger family conflict. The monarchy had survived centuries of internal tensions, and preserving unity remained one of the institution's most important priorities. But even the most experienced royal staff understood something else. Moments like this had a way of revealing deeper divisions that normally remained hidden, because beneath the calm surface of royal protocol, emotions were still very real. Pride, expectation, disappointment, And when those emotions collided with decisions involving power, influence, and legacy, the results could ripple through the entire royal family. As the story continued spreading across royal circles and public discussion, one question kept appearing again and again. What did King Charles III truly think about the Queen's decision? After all, the estate had effectively moved past him and into the hands of his son. Charles had spent his entire life preparing to lead the monarchy, and now, one of the Queen's most treasured private properties had been entrusted directly to William. Was the king comfortable with that choice? Or had the Queen's decision created a delicate situation even within the highest level of the royal household? For the moment, Charles remained publicly silent. But behind palace doors, conversations about the estate and the tension surrounding it were only just beginning. And in the next chapter, those conversations will reveal just how carefully the royal family needed to manage the growing storm that had begun with a single quiet decision by Queen Elizabeth II. Because when legacy, loyalty, and family expectations collide inside a monarchy, the consequences rarely stay hidden for long. As public discussion about the Queen's estate continued to spread, attention slowly shifted toward one central figure whose reaction remained largely unknown. That figure was none other than King Charles III. For decades, Charles had lived under the shadow of a historic reign. As the eldest son of Queen Elizabeth II, he had spent most of his life preparing for a responsibility that would eventually place him at the very center of the British monarchy. Now that moment had finally arrived. But along with the crown came a complex web of family expectations, royal traditions, and personal relationships that required constant balance. The news that the Queen's cherished private estate had been passed directly to Prince William placed Charles in an unusual position. On the surface, the decision seemed straightforward. A grandmother had entrusted a personal property to her grandson. Yet within the structure of the royal family, such decisions always carry deeper meaning. Many observers wonder how Charles truly felt about this estate transfer. After all, under normal circumstances, royal property often flowed to the reigning monarch before moving to the next generation. But in this case, the Queen had chosen to pass the estate directly to William, quietly skipping the traditional path. Publicly, Charles showed no sign of concern. Those who watched him during official engagements noticed the same calm composure he had maintained throughout many challenging moments of royal life. Years of experience had taught him that stability was essential for the monarchy. No matter what private discussions were taking place behind palace doors, the public image of unity had to remain intact. Still, within the private corridors of royal residences, conversations about the estate were becoming increasingly common. Senior advisors discussed the potential implications. Royal aides carefully monitored public reactions, and members of the extended royal family quietly formed their own opinions about what the Queen's decision might mean for the future. Among those most affected by the growing attention was Camilla. For many years, Camilla had worked patiently to establish her place within the royal institution. Her journey into the heart of the monarchy had not been easy. Public perception had evolved slowly, and she had spent a long time earning acceptance from royal supporters. By the time Charles became king, she had finally reached a position of stability within the royal family. Yet this estate decision unexpectedly placed her in an uncomfortable situation. While the Queen's choice had never been directed against her personally, the reactions coming from parts of her extended family were difficult to ignore. Some members of that circle reportedly viewed the inheritance as a sign that their own place within the royal structure would remain limited. The estate had symbolized an opportunity, a connection to the Queen's personal legacy. Now that opportunity had clearly been given elsewhere, inside private gatherings and quiet conversations. Frustration began to surface more openly. It was not necessarily directed toward William himself. In fact, many acknowledged that Prince William had always maintained a respectful and disciplined role within the monarchy. But the decision still felt like a reminder of something important. No matter how much the royal family evolved, the core legacy of the crown would always remain tied to the direct line of succession. And in that line, William represented the future far more clearly than anyone else. Meanwhile, William himself continued approaching the situation with remarkable caution. Those who worked closely with him noticed that he rarely spoke about the estate publicly or privately. Instead, he focused on his ongoing responsibilities, charitable work, royal engagements, and preparing for the long-term role he would one day inherit. This restraint helped prevent the situation from escalating further. The last thing William wanted was to create the appearance of competition within the royal family. His approach reflected the same values that had guided his relationship with the Queen. Duty first, personal matters second. Still, the symbolism of the estate transfer continued attracting attention. Royal historians began discussing the broader context of the Queen's decision. Many pointed out that throughout history, monarchs had often used personal property to send quiet messages about trust and legacy. By choosing William as the estate's future owner, the Queen had essentially reaffirmed her confidence in the next generation of royal leadership. For some observers, that message carried enormous significance. The monarchy was entering a period of transition. The era of Queen Elizabeth II had been defined by stability and long-term continuity. But the future would now depend on how the next generation managed the institution's evolving role in modern society. And in that future, William's position would be central. This reality was something King Charles III understood better than anyone. Throughout his life, Charles had navigated the delicate balance between personal feelings and royal duty. His decades as Prince of Wales had prepared him to place the institution above individual concerns. If the Queen had believed William should inherit the estate, Charles was unlikely to challenge that decision. Instead, his focus remained on preserving unity within the family. Because the monarchy had always relied on one essential principle, stability, any sign of visible conflict among senior royals could easily create unnecessary controversy. And Charles had no intention of allowing a private inheritance matter to become a public division. Yet even with careful management, subtle tensions continued to linger. In certain royal social circles, the story of the estate had become a topic that people discussed quietly but frequently. Some viewed the decision as brilliant foresight from the Queen. Others saw it as a surprising departure from traditional inheritance expectations. And within the extended family connected Camilla, the disappointment had not entirely faded. For them, the estate represented more than land. It symbolized recognition, a connection to the Queen's personal trust. And now that trust had clearly been placed somewhere else. Some questioned whether their growing prominence within the royal circle could ever match the personal trust bestowed upon William. Within the palace, advisors encouraged restraint. The monarchy's stability depended on discretion. Any overt reaction could spiral into public controversy, undermining the careful management of royal image that the Queen had spent decades cultivating. Yet beneath this calm surface, the emotional undercurrents were real. Pride, expectation, disappointment, and ambition swirled quietly, influencing relationships that had always demanded careful navigation. Meanwhile, William focused on what truly mattered. Beyond legalities and public perception, he began considering how the estate could serve as a tangible extension of the values the Queen had cherished: stewardship, continuity, and family connection. Plans were quietly discussed for preserving the estate's historical significance, maintaining its natural beauty, and ensuring that it remained a place of learning and reflection for future generations. Unlike ceremonial engagements that carried immediate visibility, this work was deliberate, thoughtful, and deeply personal. He understood that inheriting the property also meant inheriting responsibility for its preservation, its legacy, and the subtle message it carried to the monarchy at large. The Queen had entrusted him not only with the land itself, but with the integrity of her intentions, and that trust weighed heavily. Every decision he made regarding the estate would be scrutinized, both by those within the royal family and by an attentive public. In quiet moments, William reflected on the lessons he had absorbed from the Queen over the years. Her guidance had always emphasized humility, foresight, and a profound sense of duty. Now, those principles would be tested in ways that extended beyond his personal preparation for kingship. The estate became a symbol of continuity, a living testament to the careful balance between tradition and the evolving needs of a modern monarchy. And as he walked its paths, William realized something else. The estate was more than a connection to the Queen. It was a bridge to the next generation of royals, a place where values could be passed down, stories preserved, and the weight of history honored. By managing it with care and intention, William could ensure that the lessons of the past continued to inform the monarchy's future. Yet even in these private moments, he remained aware of the undercurrents around him. Camilla's family remained sensitive to the implications of the estate transfer. Advisors cautioned that while discretion was essential, awareness of these dynamics was equally important. Managing relationships within the royal household required a balance of tact, empathy, and unwavering focus on long-term priorities. William embraced this challenge. He did not seek conflict, nor did he desire validation. His goal was clear: to honor the Queen's trust, safeguard her legacy, and ensure that the estate became a source of continuity, reflection, and guidance for generations yet to come. As preparations continued, the royal family adjusted to this new reality. The transfer had marked a subtle shift in the balance of influence within the household, and while outward appearances remained composed, the private awareness of this change reshaped conversations, priorities, and long-term planning. Through it all, William remained steadfast. He understood that the Queen's estate was more than property. It was a responsibility that symbolized trust, continuity, and the enduring values of the monarchy. And as he began to envision its role in the future, one truth became evident. The inheritance of the estate was not simply a gift. It was a mandate to preserve the Queen's vision, carry forward her values, and embody the principles that had guided her reign. With the transfer of the Queen's private estate now fully completed and William assuming responsibility, the royal household entered a delicate phase of adjustment. Outwardly, life continued as always. Official duties, public engagements, and ceremonial appearances unfolded with precision and dignity. But behind the palace walls, the undercurrents of family dynamics and legacy planning had shifted in subtle yet profound ways. For Prince William, the focus remained clear. The estate was no longer simply a gift. It was a living testament to the trust placed in him by Queen Elizabeth II. Every decision regarding its management required careful thought. The gardens, the historic rooms, and the surrounding countryside were all part of a legacy that extended beyond aesthetics or monetary value. They embodied decades of personal history, reflection, and family memory. William began to make discreet plans for the estate's preservation. But while those reactions quietly unfolded, another truth was becoming increasingly clear. The estate itself had never been about wealth or influence alone. For the Queen, it had represented peace, reflection, and family connection. By entrusting it to William, she had chosen someone she believed would preserve that spirit for future generations. Someone who understood that royal privilege always came with responsibility, and someone who would treat the estate not as a trophy of inheritance, but as a living piece of royal history. As the months passed and the discussions surrounding the estate slowly settled, the royal family began returning its focus to larger responsibilities. The world was watching the transition into the reign of King Charles III. New priorities were emerging, new challenges were appearing, and the next generation of the monarchy was gradually stepping into greater roles. But one thing remained certain. The quiet decision made by Queen Elizabeth II had left a lasting mark on the royal family, not because of the land itself, but because of what it represented: trust, legacy, and the future leadership of the crown. And in the next chapter, that legacy would begin to take on a new meaning as Prince William started considering what the Queen's beloved estate could become in the years ahead. With the formal transfer of the Queen's cherished private estate complete, Prince William stepped into a role he had long anticipated, but in ways far more personal than public. For decades, William had been preparing for leadership within the monarchy. He had learned the nuances of duty, the delicate balance of public expectation, and the weight of legacy. Yet inheriting the estate carried a responsibility unlike any ceremonial title or official engagement. It was more than bricks and land. It was memory. It was trust. It was a Queen's personal affirmation of his judgment, character, and readiness to carry forward not only the monarchy's traditions, but also the essence of her private world. William understood that immediately. Unlike many heirs who might view such a property purely through the lens of prestige, he recognized that the estate symbolized a living connection to the monarch who had shaped modern royal life. Every tree-lined path, every room filled with centuries of family history, every hidden corner of the gardens carried a story that belonged to the Queen, and now, in a sense, to him. He walked the estate with a quiet reverence, imagining the countless hours the Queen had spent there, the moment of reflection, and decision-making that had shaped the monarchy's direction. To him, the property was a bridge between generations, a place to honor the past, but also to prepare for the future. Yet even as he absorbed the weight of this personal legacy, the world outside was far from quiet. News of the transfer had spread beyond palace walls, capturing the attention of royal commentators, historians, and public audiences alike. The narrative was clear. The Queen had chosen William, skipping over her own son, King Charles III, in matters of private inheritance. For many, this confirmed William's emerging position as a central figure in the monarchy's future. For others, it highlighted unseen tensions and rivalries within the royal family. Among those feeling the weight of the news were members of Camilla's extended family. The reaction was measured yet unmistakable. Frustration, disappointment, and a realization that the Queen's trust had been given elsewhere. Though they would never publicly challenge the decision, privately the transfer was being interpreted as a signal about the balance of influence and legacy within the monarchy. Historians and advisors were consulted to ensure that its historical significance would remain intact. Sustainable practices were considered for the land, and spaces were prepared to accommodate future generations of the royal family. While many royal properties were symbolic, this estate carried a personal dimension. It reflected the Queen's priorities, her tastes, and her commitment to continuity. William's careful stewardship aimed to honor those elements while preparing the estate for the next generation. Meanwhile, the rest of the royal family gradually adjusted to this reality. King Charles III, experienced in navigating the intricate balance of public duty and private family matters, focused on maintaining harmony within the household. He recognized that the Queen's decision was guided not by slight or preference, but by trust in William's judgment and character. By quietly supporting his son's new responsibilities, Charles reinforced the principles of continuity and respect that had long guided the monarchy. Not everyone reacted without hesitation. Within Camilla's extended family, lingering disappointment existed. Yet there was also recognition that the Queen's choice was final. Advisors encouraged diplomacy and measured responses. Over time, tensions began to ease as the emphasis shifted from inheritance disputes to the broader responsibilities and shared purpose of the royal family. Awareness of the Queen's intentions, combined with the recognition of William's measured approach, gradually helped to ease concerns and restore equilibrium within the household. As William settled into his role as the estate's steward, he also considered the broader implications of the property. It was not simply a private refuge. It was a symbol of the monarchy's evolving legacy. By honoring the Queen's vision, he could create a bridge between tradition and modernity, offering future generations a tangible connection to the values she had upheld. The estate became both a personal responsibility and a strategic opportunity to maintain continuity, to embody dignity, and to exemplify the thoughtful leadership expected of the next generation. In private conversations and reflective walks through the estate, William often considered the Queen's enduring lessons. Her insistence on duty, discretion, and balance now guided his management of the property. He understood that the estate was a tool of stewardship as much as it was a symbol of trust. Every decision, from conservation practices to historical preservation, was infused with a deep respect for the monarchy's enduring principles and for the woman who had entrusted it with one of her most personal possessions. Publicly, the narrative remained composed. Royal commentators noted William's expanding role, but few fully understood the personal dimension of his inheritance. To the outside world, the estate appeared as a continuation of William's growing prominence within the monarchy. Yet privately, the significance of the estate as a reflection of the Queen's trust was unmistakable. By the end of this transitional period, several truths had become clear. The estate was secure, its legacy intact, and William's stewardship thoughtful and deliberate. The royal family had navigated the quiet tension that arose from the transfer with discretion, and the focus had returned to service, duty, and the broader responsibilities of monarchy. For William, the estate was now more than a property. It was a responsibility, a symbol of trust, and a tangible connection to the woman whose life had defined a generation. In honoring her wishes, William solidified his role as a guardian of both tradition and the future. He demonstrated that inheritance within a royal family was never merely about assets or influence. It was about character, judgment, and continuity. And as the estate entered a new chapter under his stewardship, one thing became certain. The Queen's personal trust had been placed wisely, and the future of her private legacy was secure in the hands of someone who understood its meaning. The story of the Queen's estate, once a private sanctuary, had now become a symbol of the enduring strength of the monarchy, a legacy carefully preserved, a family quietly united, and a future guided by the lessons of the past.